All right, y'all, we back at it with Cartel Wives Chapter 3. Welcome back to the channel. If you have yet to hit the subscribe button, please do. Salute to all the returning viewers. Salute to all the new viewers. Everybody out there seems to be excited about this series, and so am I. If you're interested in purchasing Cartel Wives in any of its forms, there's an Amazon link in the description. They gave us the preamble in chapters 1 and 2. We got a list of notable characters that are going to be talked about, and we got some information on the reasons that this book was even written. With all that said, let's get into chapter 3.
Part 1. The American Dream. Chapter 1. Olivia. I was born in 1975 in Pilsen, a predominantly Mexican-American neighborhood in Chicago's Lower West Side, about 3 miles southwest of the Loop. Pilsen was about as inner city as you can get, and growing up I thought it was normal to see crowds of gangbangers on the corner near my house. I just assumed everywhere was like that, but now that I'm an adult, I get it. My husband and I had a conversation recently, and he was like, "Pilsen is a low-income neighborhood." I said, "No, it's middle class." "Babe, you were not middle class." "Yeah, I guess you're right." I hadn't even realized it till he said something. In my mind, we lived in a great neighborhood because my parents did everything they could to make my older sister and me feel comfortable.
And let me tell you something, you can't tell that generation that they weren't middle class. You know what I'm saying? They worked hard, they tried not to complain and didn't complain and did what they had to do to cut out their little piece that they can cut out. And that's what they did. You know, for those that know Pilsen now, you know, the gangs are still prevalent, but it's a totally different neighborhood than what it was then at those times. Not to say that things ain't bad. Things are still bad.
My grandfather came from Mexico when my dad was 7 or 8, then saved enough money to bring his family over too. The immigration process wasn't easy, and it took a few years because he chose to do it legally. But he was an honest, hardworking man, and he wouldn't have had it any other way. Dad came to Pilsen not speaking any English, and as he grew up, his mentality was the same as his dad's: work hard, buy property, and save, save, save. Dad was determined to be someone who would make his family proud. So he got his first job at 14, put in overtime, went back to school, and became a U.S. citizen. Then he became a Chicago police officer and patrolled the streets all day, bravely wearing his blue uniform. He and Mom wanted us to have the very best.
That's a whole lot, man. A whole lot. To come to a country at 14, to become a citizen, to become a community servant, a police officer, that shit wasn't easy.
So they sent my sister and me to Catholic school. We got braces in middle school when no one else had them. They saved all year, and when there was enough in the bank, they took us on family vacations to Disney World. By all accounts, we were living the American dream. Like my dad, Mom always wanted more. She sold furs at Marshall Fields, so she got a discount on designer furniture, and she filled our house with it. Our home was small, but Mom was a great decorator, so I felt like we had money. Mom was also super smart. She was very driven, very determined, and so strong and powerful that she usually got whatever she wanted. Coming from my neighborhood, she was unique. Mom was Puerto Rican, had a gorgeous body, and held her head high. When she walked into a room, everybody knew she was there. She was always glamorous and well-dressed, makeup and heels and great jewelry, even if it didn't cost much. Most importantly, though, she had a great heart to match. She always wanted something different from our neighborhood, and she dreamed of her family having a better life. At home, I was so shy, and I wasn't really able to be myself. My sister was my best friend and my biggest teacher. She had started going over multiplication tables with me when I was in kindergarten, and she was in 2nd grade. She took care of me, and I followed her around like her little shadow. I was such a daddy's girl. I clung to my dad and just showed my mom what she wanted to see or told her what she wanted to hear. She was such a firecracker, and so controlling that if I crossed her, I wouldn't have heard the end of it. But outside the house, I was completely the opposite. I mimicked my mom. Loud, impressive, and in charge. I was the cool girl in school, and I had my shit together. I met my first boyfriend in middle school, and even though he was 16, he didn't mind that I was only 14. I had a great body and was so confident, trying to be all mature and sophisticated like my mom. I was a virgin, but I was so infatuated with him that I wasn't all that scared when we became sexually active early on. What did I know at 14? I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with this guy. After a few months of being with him, I began throwing up and missed my period. I didn't make much of it, though. I wasn't keeping track of stuff like that. But when I found out I was pregnant, I was shocked. I remember thinking, how could this possibly happen to me?
I think it was sex.
I came from a good family. I studied like crazy, and I'd always gotten straight A's. Even though Mom pushed for open communication with her girls, I was too scared and embarrassed to open up to her. My sister always told her everything, but I was so shy I covered my ears every time Mom tried to talk about sex. That's why it took me forever to work up the courage to tell her I was pregnant. When I finally did, she was so hurt and disappointed. "What do you mean?" she said. "You're only 15. I put you through private school. I gave you everything." When my dad found out, he hugged me tight, tears streaming down his face. "Olivia, your mom told me you're pregnant. I love you, and I'd do anything for you. I don't want you to be scared. Whatever you decide to do, your mom and I are here." My sister, who was away at college, even got on a Greyhound bus to come home to be with me. Mom and Dad had always made it clear that family was everything, so all of them were going to support me no matter what. In the back of my mind, though, having this baby was going to make me a woman. I was finally going to be my own person. My mom wasn't going to be able to run my life, and I wasn't going to have any rules. I was going to have my baby, finish school.
That baby's gonna run your life. That baby's gonna make all the rules. Don't get it twisted, young Thundercats out there. That baby makes the rules. You don't make no rules.
And spend the rest of my life with my boyfriend. I was in love. I was mature. And my mom couldn't tell me a damn thing. That didn't happen. After I had Xavier, I hated how strict my parents were, making me follow the same rules and giving me the same curfew. My boyfriend would come over and see our son, and my mom would scream at me, "You can't sit on his lap in my house. You can't be in the same room together alone." Not one fucking thing had changed. But thank God they hadn't. Thank God I still had the stability of home, because my boyfriend started to cheat on me. When I told him I wanted to break up, he punched me in the face. This was the first time anyone had ever put their hands on me. I lied to my parents and told them I'd gotten hit in the eye with a snowball. Then I stayed with him for 2 more years because I thought I was doing the best thing for my son. Here I was, this supposedly strong, mature, teenage woman, and I was letting this man control me. The person who finally saved me was Xavier, who was all of 2 years old. I couldn't let him see me falling apart, so I broke up with his dad and never looked back. I felt nothing but animosity toward my ex, but for the sake of my son, Mom always told me never to speak badly or negatively about him. "If you put Xavier's father down, he'll feel like a failure. As a mother, it's your responsibility to always protect him." My mom was really wise, and I respected her wishes. I didn't want to influence Xavier's feelings in any way, so I quickly learned to contain my feelings about his father. I wanted him to be the dad Xavier needed him to be, without my influence. It was the right thing to do. My parents were pretty much saints those first few years with Xavier. I was working at Dunkin' Donuts or some other minimum wage job and spending my whole paycheck on diapers, trying so hard to be responsible, and Mom told me she'd put my son through private school once the time came. My dad became a real father figure to him, signing him up for t-ball and hanging out with him every chance he got. "He's my little man," he'd say, and then run off and put my son in his car seat so they could go to the park together. I'd always been my dad's baby girl, and he was just as sweet with my son. Whether you're 15 or 40, every mom wants what's best for her kids, but we're not perfect. We all have our breaking points. Toward the middle of high school, I had mine. Just before I had Xavier, I begged my mom to enroll me in public school. "It's a great high school," I said. "It's really changing. They have all these new programs, and I'll be closer to home for the baby." For the first time in her life, my mom just gave in and let me have my way.
Yep.
Maybe she actually believed me, or maybe she was just tired of fighting. Either way, I think it was the worst decision she ever made. That school was so ghetto. It was gang-infested. It was drug-infested. The Chicago PD patrolled it, and so many people brought knives to school that they installed metal detectors.
My mother has the same reservations about the high school I went to, but all the other choices were pretty much the same shit either. Shorty here had the opportunity to go to a private school, so that's a big difference right there. So I can see how that decision shifted things.
Nobody ever went to class. Instead, they all went to daytime parties. During my freshman and sophomore years, I'd been so responsible and avoided all of that. I'd been the first girl in my high school to start freshman year with a full-on belly, and since then I'd been working my butt off to be a good mom. I'd gone straight from school to work to home so I could put my baby to bed. But after a while, I just couldn't take it anymore. I'd always put my son first, but being young and selfish, I just wanted to make myself happy. I started hanging out with the gangbangers and drug dealers, and all of a sudden, I was around nice cars, money, and jewelry. I loved every single bit of it, but when I'd get home, all Mom and I would do was fight, fight, fight. "I raised you better than this," she'd say. "Xavier needs you." I'd turn it around on her and scream about how strict she'd always been with me. "What do you expect from me? I'm young and I need to have a life too. Besides, I'm still making straight A's." I might have had 20 absences from cutting school and hanging out at parties all day, but I was making good grades at that shithole school. I thought I was the bomb, and no one could tell me otherwise. I was voted smartest, best dressed, and most popular in my class, and I graduated in 3 years at the young age of 17. I got a full ride to the University of Illinois at Chicago, and my parents couldn't have been happier. But after my second semester, I threw it all away. There was no way I was going to wait 4 long years until I started making money, so I told my parents that I was enrolling in cosmetology school. "It's my dream to open up a salon," I said, trying to sell them on the idea of me dropping out. They were heartbroken. My sister was getting ready to graduate college and was figuring out where to go get her master's degree, and here I was, going to beauty school. Before it was all said and done, my 9th-month cosmetology program turned into 2 years. It just wasn't my priority. What I was seeing on the streets was too exciting for me to stay away. It wasn't the drugs, it was the money. Gangbangers have nice cars with rims, and diamond studs and expensive watches. They were bringing home mad cash, and it wasn't from Dunkin' Donuts. It was from the great state of California. When I was 17, I started taking trips to California to smuggle weed. I'd hop on a bus and ride for 2 days out there. Then a handful of guys and I would meet up with a connect. I'd watch them scoop up a few pounds of marijuana, put it into a potato sack, and then compress it with a machine. The weed would become a hard, square block.
So she went all the way in. She made a clear, concise decision of I'm gonna dive in. I'm gonna see how this is done, because she's getting the crash course.
And they'd pass it over to me and let me put it into my suitcase. I'd get on a bus back home, and when I arrived, I'd collect around $10,000. I'm the hottest, richest girl in Chicago, I thought. I made a few trips like that and never had a problem. But on one trip back, I had to change buses in Denver. When I hopped off and tried to claim my suitcase, it wasn't there. "It's on a different bus," the station agent said. "You'll have it in 2 days." I just wanted to die. I ran out of the bus station as fast as I could, took a cab to the airport, and bought a one-way ticket back to Chicago. When I got home, I drove myself crazy trying to figure out how in the hell I was going to claim the stash I'd left behind. Then, I decided to just go for it. 2 days later, I showed up to the Greyhound station with my ID in hand and picked up my load, no questions asked. I was fearless, and people started to respect me for it. Traffickers looked at me and said, "That girl knows her shit," so they decided to trust me and give me a little promotion. When one of them asked me to travel to Mexico and drive some weed back in the gas tank of my car, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Before I'd leave town, I'd lie and tell my parents I was staying at a girlfriend's house. For all they knew, I was just hanging out with my friends, drinking and partying the day away while they were taking care of Xavier. Mom was always furious. "When the hell are you coming back?" she'd yell. "In a few days." There was no, "I'll miss you," or "Thank you for taking care of my son while I'm away." Soon, she stopped talking to me altogether, and my only communication with Xavier was through my dad. It broke his heart, and deep down, it broke mine too. I told myself I was making money to take care of my son, but really, it was for me. All I cared about was having my freedom and earning a better, faster, shinier life, which came from getting rich. On the streets I'd been hanging out on, money came from one place: drugs. I went to Mexico a handful of times for the next year or so. Most of the time, things went well, but I did run into a few problems along the way. On one trip, my friend Maria and I were interrogated for hours while Border Patrol put my car on a lift and tried to remove the gas tank. Maria tried to blame it on me, saying, "It's not my car, it's hers." I don't know if it was sheer determination or if I could just talk myself out of anything, but they let us go. I was so furious at Maria, I made her get out on the side of the highway next to the roadkill so she could hitchhike home. After about 15 minutes, I started to feel bad. But more than that, I was worried about her snitching. Even though I turned around and picked her up, I sent her a clear message: "Don't mess with me." I was making real money, so I bought a black SUV with gold rims and a gold Rolex to match. I started walking around in those Versace gold coin silk shirts. All those nice things and all that power got to my head.
She had ice in her veins, man. You know what I'm saying? Like she said, they saw her as fearless. Did they look in my bag at the Greyhound station? Or do they think I'm just a passenger whose bag got held up? Let's not look in that bag. Let's just get this bag to this passenger. Boom. She deducted in her mind, was it worth the risk? And she took that risk, and it paid off for her. Whew. And then you hear her talking about, this is Val, by the way, you hear her talking about the Mexico trips with the weed in the gas tanks. If you go back to the Surviving El Chapo stuff with Wrong to Strong, he tells the story about one of them runs with her. And also she tells the story about when she got locked up. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. It was like this hustler was living dormant in this little girl. And then when it popped out, it was like, let's go, it's go time.
And I began demanding more control. I wanted in. I recruited my own drivers and got my own crew. On weekdays, I'd put together my trips, call up my drivers, and fly down to Mexico. I'd pay them $10,000 and keep all the profit. If I wasn't below the border, my weekends were all about going to clubs, popping bottles, and networking. It was validation that I was big time. Before one trip, my driver stood me up. I could do this in my sleep, I said to myself, and I decided to do the job on my own. Sure enough, I got caught. I was pulled over at a roadblock. I don't know if it was random, if I looked suspicious, or if someone had tipped them off, but it was clear I wasn't getting off this time. I don't have anything, I said. Step to the side. There weren't just police officers there. There were federal agents too, and they looked serious. I watched one of the federales drive my car to the side of the road, just like they had that time with Maria. He put my car on the lift and spent the next hour or so trying to pull the tank down. I told you I don't have anything. I was starting to get nervous, but I tried to play it cool. I heard some rattling and clanking around, and the federal pulled down the tank. Shit, this is it, I thought. Game over. He pulled a brick of weed out of my gas tank, held it above his head, then tossed it toward another agent. Then he peeled off his gloves, came toward me, pulled my arms behind me, and cuffed me. I don't think I knew what scared was till that moment. All that pride, all that defiance against my mom, all the hours and hours I'd spent at clubs rather than home with Xavier, all the diamonds and bottles of champagne I'd bought over the last year. It had all come to this.
Shit just got real.
What the fuck had I been thinking?
Absolutely.
The agent shoved me into the car and walked away. Looking through the window, I watched him enter a little glassed-in booth nearby, where there were a few other federales. But instead of working, these dudes had their faces planted on the table, doing lines of coke. After a few minutes, 2 of them left the booth. One got behind the wheel of the car I was in, and another slid into the back seat next to me. As we were driving, he reached over and touched my chest.
Oh, wow.
Please don't hurt me, I said in English, because my Spanish was terrible. All I could think was, oh my God, they're going to rape me. He placed his palm on my heart, leaned over, and looked me in the eyes. Your heart isn't even racing. You must not be scared, but you should be. I'm not going to hurt you. Next to me, as we were driving, he reached over and touched my chest. Please don't hurt me, I said in English, because my Spanish was terrible. All I could think was, oh my God, they're going to rape me. Placed his palm on my heart, leaned over, and looked me in the eyes. Your heart isn't even racing. You must not be scared, but you should be. I'm not going to hurt you, but someone else will. You're going to prison for a very long time. I was too ashamed to call my parents, so I reached out to my sister. She hopped on a plane immediately and made it just in time for sentencing, which happened within 72 hours of my arrest. When the judge sentenced me, she was right by my side. I got 10 years in a maximum security prison.
Damn. Now, we heard this story in Surviving El Chapo. Talk about when shit gets real. Shit got real the first time, and the first time you get smacked in the head with 10 years.
Mexican prison is about as bad as you'd imagine it to be, especially if you're a scared little girl like I was. The living conditions were unimaginably filthy and disgusting, and being American in a third-world prison was torture every single day. I slept on a cement bed surrounded by cement walls. There was no glass on the windows, only bars, so roaches, mice, spiders, and sometimes even cats crept in at night. I ate black beans with my hands because they wouldn't give us spoons, and the water they made us drink from the faucets was contaminated, dirty, and brown. I vomited or had diarrhea pretty much every single day. On Thanksgiving, we got a real feast, which was 5 animal crackers and tea, and I thought it was the best thing in the whole fucking world. 3 months passed slowly, and I missed Xavier so much it burned. I was given 1 phone call a month, and I mustered up the courage to call my parents. I'm sorry. I'm so ashamed. I'm just so sorry. It's okay, baby. We love you. You have to stay strong. After my sister got back from Mexico, she felt guilty leaving me. Knowing I was suffering laid so heavy on her heart that she slept on the cold tile floor so she could understand my pain. But all of my family's love and support made me feel unworthy. I regretted everything I'd put them through, and I hated myself for covering my ears instead of listening to my mom. Every night, I got on my knees and prayed to the Virgin Mary. Please, get me out of here. I'd cry and plead. I made all kinds of promises to her. I'll change my life. I'll be a good mother. On the concrete floor, my knees turned raw and bled, but I just kept praying every single night. Before I'd gone to prison, I'd met a guy named Leo who owned a body shop. I had a nice car, with rims on it, really nice and shiny. When I took it to get painted, I met Leo, and he was into me right away. I was very independent. I had my own money. I had this nice car and was living the life. For a girl in our neighborhood, that was rare. Leo didn't talk down to me. He was respectful and totally impressive. Pretty soon, we were dating. I knew he was a drug dealer because I'd gone to his condo and had seen a triple beam scale and money counter, but I didn't care. I liked his nice car and his nice house, and he had a business that my parents actually believed was real. He was polite and well-mannered, and he dressed well, not super flashy like the gangbangers I used to hang out with when I was younger. A few months into my prison sentence, Leo came to visit, unannounced. "Oh my God, Leo, what are you doing here?" I said when I saw him. I'd thought a little bit about him, but I hadn't used my one call a month on him, much less asked him to come down. We'd just started dating, but here was this real, live person from home, not a coked-up federal or a perverted prison guard. He was like a vision of the Holy Mother herself. Leo stayed for a month and visited me every weekend. He had the warden on payroll, so he even managed to pull off conjugal visits once a week. I was in the federal side of the prison, which was better than the state side, where all the killers and thieves were. In my section, there were a bunch of older boss ladies who were in for drugs, and Leo really took to them. He'd bring us lobster and steak and matching sneakers, and we'd hang out together like a big family. It almost felt like a scene from Goodfellas. I knew he was paying off the prison guards to make every visit as long as possible. But if that's the way things worked, that's the way it would be. In the position I was in, Leo was in charge. One weekend, he made an announcement. "I paid your judge $250,000 and he's letting you go." Just like that, I was gonna get the hell out of there. No one had ever done anything like that for me, so I was shocked. I spent 6 months in that shithole, and I practically sprinted out of there the day they let me go. Leo had saved me, giving me that second chance to become a better person. I married him after he whisked me away from Mexican prison, not because I loved him, but because I loved what he'd done for me.
All right. So, I don't know how many stints she did in Mexican prisons, but this is not the story that we heard in Surviving El Chapo. What we heard in Surviving El Chapo was that she snapped her leg so that she didn't have to go upstairs, and she was going to go make her phone call, and the lawyer pulled up in front, and she ran out of there. Maybe, quite possibly, this is a version of the story that at the time she wrote the book, she had to tell this way, as to not give up too much information, this, that, or the other. Who knows what changed in 2023, because I believe the book was published in 2017, so it was probably written in 2016. So I would think if stories like that change, maybe there was reasons then that they couldn't talk about it and felt like they could talk about it in 2021 or whenever they did the Surviving El Chapo series. So, because that's definitely not the escape. That's not the escape we heard. This was, she got saved. That was salvation. That wasn't the escape though. Again, as we go on, I don't know. Maybe she goes back to a Mexican prison. I don't know, but we shall see.
I married him after he whisked me away from Mexican prison, not because I loved him, but because I loved what he'd done for me. I felt obligated. What had I done to deserve this? What hadn't I done, really? Maybe I'd spent my life reacting to a mom who I thought was too strict, or maybe there was too much of her brashness in me. But all I know is that it all came down to wanting a bigger, better life, one that was far away from a single-family home off the blue line in Pilsen. I wanted to open a hair salon one day, but that didn't guarantee me a life outside the ghetto. Like way too many people I knew, I'd turned to drugs. They were just how people got money in our neighborhood. You had to stick bricks of weed in your gas tank, deal it on the street, or hook up with a guy like Leo to be able to afford more than what a paycheck from Dunkin' Donuts got you. We had a big, beautiful wedding and went to Hawaii for our honeymoon. I'd wanted to protect my parents from the truth about why I'd gotten out of prison early, so I told them that Leo had hired an attorney in Mexico who'd successfully appealed my case. In reality, it was Leo's money that actually got me out. My parents thought he was the best thing to ever happen to me. They thought Leo was legitimate, but his body shop, it was just a front. Our problems started almost immediately. Leo became so controlling.
I'm surprised her father never caught a whiff of him being in the game.
To let me go out with my cousins or girlfriends. He put a recording device under the driver's seat of my brand new Lexus and installed a tracking device in it.
Oh, he was a nutso.
One night he followed me to a salsa club with my girlfriends and threw a drink at me when I refused to leave with him. My face, my hair, my white dress and jewelry were all soaked, and I told myself I wouldn't go home with him, but I did. After all, I had everything I thought I'd always wanted. Leo was going to help me get ahead in the world. With him, I could go back to school and open my salon. With him, I was wearing Versace and Chanel and going to Bulls championship games with courtside seats. I'd seen Michael Jordan get his 5th and 6th rings. For a girl from Pilsen who had a kid at 15, that's a dream come true. Yet my husband was turning into a monster right before my eyes. Then there was Xavier. He'd just enrolled at a...
He wasn't turning into nothing. He was always that. He just ended up revealing himself, little by little.
Great school, and I was finally acting like the mom I should have been all along. Yet he had to see me with some asshole. My parents had just celebrated their silver wedding anniversary. 25 years, and they still had an incredible relationship that they worked at every day. I believed marriage was supposed to last forever, and I wanted to make it work. But the more I tried, the more controlling Leo became. We kept up appearances, hired an architect, and started to build this big, beautiful house in the suburbs. It was my dream. I thought, if I can have that, I can deal with his bullshit, right? Sure. We moved into my parents' lower level while it was under construction, and one morning, while Leo was walking out the door to take Xavier to school, the feds appeared. They were there for him. Right in front of my poor son, they cuffed Leo and dragged him to the squad car. Xavier started to scream, which made my mom run downstairs. "Oh my God, they're taking Leo," I heard her say. She was frantic. "What are you doing in my house? Why are you taking my son-in-law?" Of course, she had no idea he was a dealer. I was still downstairs and I was like, oh shit. I spent the next 10 minutes running around the basement like a chicken with its head cut off, ripping up every scrap of paper and receipt I could find. I didn't want the feds to find out anything more than they knew already. Of course, it wasn't enough because they had everything they needed. Leo was charged with conspiracy to distribute drugs and money laundering, and the feds seized our house, $1 million in jewelry, our Navigator and Lexus, and a bunch of our assets. The case against Leo was rock solid. He was going to go away for a long time. I tried to be supportive, to be a good wife, and I visited him in prison every chance I got. He could call as much as he wanted, too. There was no 300-minute limit at that time. He rang me nonstop and was just as controlling as he'd been when he wasn't locked away. I wasn't just embarrassed. I was crushed. I'd never wanted to hurt my parents, yet I'd broken their hearts again. My dad had trusted me, and I'd disrespected and betrayed him by letting a drug dealer come into his home, his sanctuary. For the first time in her life, my mom was at a loss for words, but her silence said enough.
I've always wondered if Val's father ever had an inkling or if he was on the take himself. But from everything I've heard from other people involved in the story, from her herself, that man was on the level. You know what I'm saying? He was a proud Chicago police officer.
Leo sat in prison with no house and a wife he couldn't really control from behind bars, and he felt like he had nothing else to lose. He realized that if he didn't work with the authorities, he might spend even more time in jail, so he decided to cooperate with them. I screamed at him when I found out. "You what? How dare you?" In my world, being a snitch was the worst possible thing you could be. It was the ultimate betrayal of everything you stood for and made you less than a person. "I had to," he said. "Things are only going to get worse for me if I don't." "You fucking rat," I said. "I just cannot be with you. I don't respect you. You knew exactly what you were involved in. You're not a man. I have more balls than you." I left him that day and never went back. I wanted nothing more to do with him, and I decided to file for divorce. Stalking me had been bad, and tossing a drink on me had been worse. But being a snitch was just too much. Was it an excuse for me to leave him? Probably. But it was just the last fucking straw for me. And apparently, it was soon going to be the last straw for him, too. Luckily, at that point, I'd already moved on.
All right, that was chapter 3 of Cartel Wives. Basically, an insight into the ice in Val's veins, man, and where she comes from. You know, I always wondered if her father was on the take. I always wondered if that was something that she caught in her family's culture. But no, she's just the story of a chick that saw the life and jumped in. Happens to a lot of people. You know what I'm saying? She just happened to be real good at it and fearless at it. But again, she didn't have nothing to compare it to. She was winning every time she went off and made a delivery. She was winning every time she went off and did this. It wasn't until shit get a little hectic, that's when you realize what the game is really about. But again, we know from the stories that we've heard and other things, she was cut out for it. You know what I'm saying? She survived a whole lot of shit. So again, this chapter was an insight into where she got that kind of game, why she got that kind of game, and where it took her quickly. Yeah, at the beginning of the episode, I wondered if they were just going to go through a whole life story, you know what I'm saying? But they paced it pretty well. They got to the meat and potatoes of it right away. What I am questioning is the whole prison story. Again, it could have been something they couldn't talk about when they wrote the book that they talked about now on Surviving El Chapo. So they changed the story, or I don't know, or maybe she goes back to a Mexican prison. What do I know? That's what we're here to find out. The story of her breaking out of jail, it was not that Leo story. There's a discrepancy in there somewhere. But we got the story of the first kingpin she was with, which was Leo, and his downfall, how that went down. If you're interested in purchasing Cartel Wives in any of its forms, there's an Amazon link in the description.